On January 19th, 2025, 3 Israeli hostages were released finally by Hamas. The hostages were captured during the October 7th terrorist attack by Hamas. The release is part of ongoing negotiations and hopefully a step toward broader peace efforts, though many hostages remain in captivity and we must bring them all home. So let's be very clear. The hostages are not a political issue. Political pressures must not hinder their release. Their lives are a humanitarian issue. Their lives are nonpartisan. The hostages really cannot wait any longer. But if there is a sort of clear victor in this whole thing, it is Qatar. They nurtured Hamas, creating the horrors of October 7th, and then leveraged negotiations over the hostages for political influence and financial gain. So the question still remains, how does a terrorist state like Qatar get away with funding and harboring Hamas terrorist leaders, then being congratulated for some reason by certain people for their good work on a ceasefire? It's absurd and morally wrong. Because for months, all the pro-Palestine protesters said is, all we want is to end the violence. Now with hostilities suspended and hostages finally being freed, they're calling for a revolution. What revolution? A revolution of what exactly? A revolution of Iranians against the regime, Lebanese against Hezbollah, Yemenis against the Houthis, Gazans against Hamas. It was never about an end to the violence, hence why their activities aren't suspended by this ceasefire. The Middle East created this opportunity for Westerners to revive their savior complex through these foreign lands. So by revolution, they of course mean the success of jihad, no matter the price of death and destruction. So long as it provides them with this intellectual masturbation of identifying as defenders of the oppressed. Then to make situations worse, we have seen footage of child soldiers in Gaza firing guns in the air from different crowds. This is how Hamas replenishes their soldiers, quote unquote, so quickly. But these disturbing scenes of child soldiers are regrettably, all too common under the Islamic regime in Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen, ISIS, etc. Why? Because the young mind is more susceptible than the fully formed adult brain. And this is the optimal stage for recruiting lifelong jihadists. But if you're an orphan but if you orphan Middle Eastern children, they'll grow up to be terrorists. That's the claim of some people. Stop it, stop it, stop it. Nobody is more racist than those who assume children are born terrorists, just waiting for a trigger. Why would you wouldn't say that about orphaned American children? Would you say such a thing as such a shame they lost their parents? They'll no doubt grow up terrorists now. Of course not, because it's both ignorant and false. What creates terrorists out of children is jihadist child exploitation rings. They brainwash children to sacrifice their lives in service of a death cult and convince them that this is the only way to find meaning in life. In any other context where adults groomed young children to kill themselves to do the groomer's bidding, you'd call it child abuse. When jihadists do it, for some reason, you call it liberation. If Western far leftists weren't so blinded by their racism, masked as cultural relativism, they'd stand in solidarity with, not against, the children. So with that context, any honest observer should be able to look at the footage emerging from Gaza, featuring these genocidal, anti-Semitic chants, glorification of terrorism, the near lynching of hostages, and a well-fed civilian population, and confront these 3 fundamental truths. 1, Gaza is a profoundly sick society, deeply entrenched in radicalization. Undoing this will require decades of comprehensive efforts, and even then, success is far from guaranteed. 2, for 15 months, you've been fed blatant lies about genocide and famine. You have been systematically deceived. 3, Hamas cannot be allowed to play any role in governing Gaza after the war and must cease to exist as a functional entity. Anyone who refuses to acknowledge these 3 realities needs to take a good, hard look at their moral compass and do it fast. Then remember that ethnic cleansing, genocide, starvation, and slavery are actually happening in Sudan, Libya, Nigeria, Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere by jihadists just like Hamas. Because if you think jihadist terrorists kidnapping and killing women and children to create an Islamic state under Sharia law is freedom fighting, then you have it all wrong. So thank you for your time and attention.